When we start final assembly of our small gas engine, we want to make sure that all of our parts are clean, and we're going to install our crankshaft into our engine block next. We want to make sure when we install the crankshaft that the governor gear on the crankshaft meshes with the gear on the governor inside of the engine block. So after our parts are clean, we can simply install the journal of the crankshaft into the bearing inside of the engine. You may need to rotate the crankshaft in order to get the two gears to mesh. And after our crankshaft is installed, we're going to install our piston and connecting rod into the cylinder. Before we install our piston and connecting rod into the cylinder, we want to make sure that the gaps on the piston rings are opposing each other. By that I mean the gap on the top ring is over here, and the gap on the second ring is on this side. We do this to make sure that the compression inside of the engine doesn't blow by one side of the piston. In order to install the piston, we need to use what's called a piston ring compressor. This is the wrench to tighten and loosen the piston ring compressor. So you'll install your piston ring compressor on the piston, and you want to make sure that you allow about 3/4 of an inch of the skirt sticking out the bottom. So I'm going to tighten this up. And you want to make sure that the compressor is flush on the top. Tighten the compressor. And before I install the piston inside of the cylinder, make sure that the arrow is pointing down. So carefully put the piston inside of the cylinder, and using the soft end of the hammer handle, you are going to hold on to the ring compressor and gently tap the piston down inside of the cylinder. Once you're below the mating surface, we can install the connecting rod onto the crankshaft. To install the connecting rod onto the crankshaft, I'm going to rotate the crankshaft so that the journal in the connecting rod lines up with the journal on the crankshaft. After those two are lined up, we can install our connecting rod cap. And when you install the connecting rod cap, make sure that the oil slinger is pointed down into the crankcase. You're going to install the connecting rod cap with the two bolts. In order to get the bottom bolt in, you may need to rotate the crankshaft and piston assembly. And I found it easiest to put the bottom bolt of the connecting rod towards the bottom of the crankcase. Using your 10mm wrench, we're going to snug the bolts up that hold the connecting rod cap to the connecting rod. Do not tighten these. We're going to tighten them with a torque wrench. Rotate the crankshaft so the top connecting rod bolt is on the top side of the crankcase, and using your 10mm wrench again, just snug that up. Do not tighten it. After your connecting rod bolts are snug, we're going to look at this chart and find the connecting rod bolt, which is highlighted in yellow, and we're going to tighten it between 106 and 124 inch-pounds. Looking at our torque wrench, we're going to use this gauge and rotate the handle until it reaches 106 inch-pounds. One side of the torque wrench is in inch-pounds. The other side is in kilograms. Make sure you're on the inch-pound side. After you get it to 106 inch-pounds, tighten the thumb screw on the bottom, which locks the handle in place. We want to make sure our torque wrench is in the tightening position, and go ahead and tighten up the two connecting rod bolts onto the crankshaft. To use our torque wrench, we're going to tighten it, and the torque wrench will click when we reach the designated setting. When your torque wrench does this, that means that you have reached 106 inch-pounds. Again, you're going to have to rotate the crankshaft so you can access the bottom bolt. Again, make sure the torque wrench clicks. Now our connecting rod cap is tightened to the connecting rod to 106 inch-pounds. Our next step is to install the exhaust and intake tappets, and simply push those inside of the engine block. Our next step is to install the camshaft. If you remember from disassembly, we need to make sure that our timing marks are lined up on the camshaft gear with the timing mark on the crankshaft gear. To do this, rotate the crankshaft until the piston is at top dead center. The piston should be flush with the surface of the cylinder. Now when I install the camshaft, I want to line up my mark on here with the crankshaft. And once these timing marks are aligned, we are ready to install the crankcase cover. Before installing the cover, I want to make sure that the mating surface is clean and free of any gasket material. And I want to make sure that the gasket is in place on the crankcase and there's no dirt or debris on it. To install this, you simply slide it on the crankshaft, and you want to look at the mating surface to make sure that the cover is up tight to the engine block. After the cover is on, we can use our 6 bolts to install the cover. Using your 10mm socket, adapter, and extension, snug these 6 bolts up. Do not tighten them, just snug them up, and we will torque them with the torque wrench. According to our torque specification sheet, we're going to look at the crankcase PTO cover bolts, and they are to be torqued between 106 and 120 inch-pounds. Using our torque wrench set at 106 inch-pounds, we're going to tighten these 6 bolts up. And when we tighten them, we want to tighten them in a crisscross pattern. So I'm going to start with this bolt. I'm going to go down to this bolt. I'm going to move over here, tighten this bolt next, down to here, up to the top bolt. So I'm always tightening them in a crisscross pattern. That way I don't tighten one edge of the cover and I could possibly break the cover by over-tightening one side. Again, when using your torque wrench, I'm going to rotate until I feel a click in the wrench. Once my crankcase cover is attached to the engine block, my next step is to install my cylinder head and push rods, and you will get that in the next video.